أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to a short course on Tawhid according to the Holy Qur'an. Inshallah, we will try to understand the profound meanings of the reality of Tawhid and its different manifestations. And because the discussion entails a lot of details, we have divided it into two sections. So inshallah, today we will look at section 1. First of all, let us look at some introductory discussions, and then inshallah we will go further. When we define the word Tawheed, Tawheed in its etymology comes from the root word Waw, Hay, and Dal, Wahada, which according to lexicographers such as Ibn Faris is actually signifies oneness or singleness or solitariness. So it is what you call al-infirad. It is somebody who is alone. No one is with him. This is what the root word of Waw, Hay, Dal mean. This is as far as the etymology of the word Tawheed is concerned. Now, having known that, we must understand that in Arabic, there are linguistic forms. The word Tawheed is in a specific linguistic form, which is Taf'il. Inshallah, we will look at the meaning of Taf'il. These are just definitions. We have not come to the main discussion. So when we look at Tawheed, it is in the linguistic form of Taf'il. And Taf'il are from the verbs fa'ala, yufa'ilu. When we say wahada, yuwahidu, we mean that he considered a or something to be one, or he is considering something to be one. There is a question, it seems, I have seen, all right, it's just wa alaikum assalam. So this is the linguistic form of taf'il. Whenever the linguistic form taf'il is employed, it means one of the meanings, obviously, there are many meanings of taf'il. One of them is to consider something one or to reckon something one, right? So this is the linguistic form of Tawheed. We are coming to the crux of the signification and the crux of the meaning of Tawheed, inshallah. Having known that, we look at the literal lexical meaning of what Tawheed is now. التوحيد في اللغة الحكم بأن الشيء واحد. Tawheed lexically means to reckon a thing to be one. So all these are just trying to, show you that this is the actual meaning from different references. Like, for example, here we have At-Ta'rifat of Jorjani, which is one of the very important definition texts which defines different important realities that are talked about in religion. When he defines Tawheed, he says Tawheed lexically means to reckon a thing to be one. And we have known that the reality is that because it is in the linguistic form of Taf'il. Now, this is all lexical meaning of what Tawheed is, because a person would ask, if you say Tawheed means to consider, to reckon something one, what does that mean actually? Because we are talking of God here, but you are talking of something, to reckon something one. This is the lexical and the literal meaning of Tawheed. Now let's look at the terminological meaning of Tawheed. So terminological definition, if you look at the religious terminology, Tawheed means to reckon God as one. In chapter of Tawheed, that is chapter number 112, which we say Surah Qul Huwallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, say He, Allah, is one. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling His messenger that reckon Allah to be one. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. So reckoning Him as one is, it comes from a person who is a muwahhid, one who actually pronounces Tawheed. He reckons somebody as one and he literally expresses the same. So this is as far as the terminology is concerned. We don't want to go into the details of this because our main discussion is more profound, inshallah. Now, before we look at the different levels of Tawheed and the meaning of Tawheed in depth, there is a noteworthy classification of Tawheed. Tawheed is classified into three kinds. We have the Tawheed of the divine essence, which is known as At-Tawheed Al-Dhati. What do we mean by At-Tawheed Al-Dhati? I will give you some points about what we mean about At-Tawheed Al-Dhati, and then inshallah we will look at the references from the Holy Qur'an later. But first of all, these are all introductory discussions just to give you an outline of what we inshallah we will what we are going to be discussing inshallah. So as far as Tawheed of the divine essence is concerned, there are four meanings that we can derive when we talk about Tawheedul Dhat. One is when we consider God to be a non-composite one, a reality that does not have any parts. And for this, those who use the terminology, the correct terminology, they say the simplicity of God. When we say simplicity, we should not be taken or drawn into thinking of, a God who is humble and simple. No, simple meaning that He is non-composite. He is actually infinite. He doesn't have any kind of parts whatsoever. Inshallah, we will look at how the Muslim scholars interpret this unity of Allah. The second thing about the unity of essence is that God is an overwhelming one. Once we have defined or we have known that the reality of Allah is infinite and indivisible, we'll find that an infinite reality cannot accept another parallel to it. That is impossible. Intellectually, it is impossible. Ontologically, it is impossible. So, first of all, we talk of God's simplicity, that He doesn't have any parts, that He is non-composite. Secondly, we talk of Allah's oneness, which is known as Samadiyya also. That oneness which is the overwhelming one, that in the Holy Quran also, inshallah, we will look at the references of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks of Al-Wahid Al-Qahhar, that He is one, but He is a dominant one, which does not accept another besides Him. And inshallah, we'll look at the corollaries and the necessities of this kind of overwhelming one, because sometimes what happens, the person may ask that if He is one and an overwhelming one and He cannot accept a second, then what are these things that we see around? Aren't they parallel to God? So this is a question we will ask, and inshallah we will respond to. The third thing, when we talk of At-Tawheed Al-Dhati, we are talking of an essence which is peerless. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Nothing is like Him. He is peerless. This is what, when we talk of Tawheed Al-Dhati, this is one of the connotations of At-Tawheed Al-Dhati. The fourth important thing about At-Tawheed Al-Dhati is that God is the only being that exists. The others are all His self-disclosures and manifestations. And this is one of the most profound understandings of Tawheed. Unfortunately, many cannot comprehend this, but inshallah we will try to use simple language to make you understand what we mean when we say God is the only being and the others are all His self-disclosures and self-manifestations. All right. So this is what At-Tawheed Al-Dhati is all about. This is the first classification or the first kind of Tawheed that we will inshallah discuss in this course. The second kind of Tawheed, inshallah, that we will discuss is Tawheed as-Sifati, the Tawheed of divine attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What do we mean by Tawheed as-Sifati? One is that when we talk about Tawheed as-Sifati, we are talking of God's attributes to be one with his essence. You will find that some of the schools of thought or Islamic schools of thought think or conjecture that Allah is composed of his essence and his attributes. Once you talk of a composition, you talk of contingency and dependency. And Allah is independent in existence. And therefore, any kind of composition whatsoever cannot be conceived of him. And therefore, At-Tawheed as-Sifati, one of the meanings is that God's attributes are one with his essence. And every attribute is the other attribute in itself. That means that there is no kind of difference. We have all the attributes and the essence to be one reality. It is the mind that conceives the different attributes when it looks at the essence. Inshallah, we'll talk about that also and what the great scholars have talked about it. And the second thing about the unity of attributes is that God exclusively possesses all the attributes of perfection. وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى. So no one can say that I have a separate knowledge and Allah has separate knowledge, meaning that Allah's knowledge is infinite, but I also have a knowledge which is other than his knowledge. This otherness is consumed, it is burnt out, it vanishes, it is effaced, because when we talk of Allah to have all the beautiful attributes, then when we talk of other people having those attributes, they are all manifestations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and manifestations of Allah's attributes. There is nothing like Allah has an infinite attribute of ilm and then a human being has a finite attribute of ilm. No, that otherness is taken out. If you look at the reality of what the human being has and all those who have knowledge, whatever they have, they are all self-disclosures and manifestations of Allah's attribute. And therefore, that's why you will find, inshallah, when we'll talk about the Quranic discussion, when we'll come to that, you will come to know that Allah has said exclusively, Allah is the hearer, for example. He is the listener. Huwa as-Sami'ul Alim. If you look at it linguistically, and if you look at it grammatically, you will come to realize that here Allah says exclusively, only Allah listens, exclusively Allah has knowledge, and so on, as we will come to, inshallah, realize. And therefore, another meaning of At-Tawheed as-Sifati is that we are saying that everything, all the attributes only belong to Allah. وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى. All right, as chapter 7, verse number 180 is vocal about. So this is as far as the third, the second kind of Tawheed that we are going to talk about, inshallah, in the near future. The third kind that, inshallah, we will discuss is the Tawheed of divine action, At-Tawheed al-Af'ali, which is one of the most subtler or one of the most subtlest Tawheed that you can ever talk about. And it is also sometimes confusing. What will we talk about in this kind of Tawheed? The first important thing that, inshallah, we will discuss is that God alone is the doer of every action whatsoever, whether the action pertains to the action of creation or there is a direct action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to understand this, we have put a bracket and we say that all the actions of the creation are created by God in terms of existence. but the responsibility of all the actions are on the shoulders of the creation. This is because out of God's wisdom, He existentiates what anyone wills. So Allah has given us a free will. In fact, if you look at it in a profound way, every human being has a free will. Whenever he wants to do something, it is Allah who existentiates and makes that happen, because we don't have any power. That's why at a number of places or in a number of areas we say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliyyil azim. Every strength and power and movement is by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We may conjecture and think that, I also have a power and Allah has a power, for example, but that is wrong. So it is by Allah's power. We do have a will, and that doesn't need a lot of contemplation, because you yourself can know yourself. You have a free will. You want to go somewhere, you go. You want to sit somewhere, you can sit somewhere. Whenever you want to do something, you can do something. But everything is by Allah's power. Obviously, this will that Allah has gifted us out of wisdom is also limited. For example, if you want to fly somewhere, or if you want to do something which is, cannot be done easily according to your capacity, you cannot do that. But you can do supernatural things by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the one who is the main mediation, or the person who is the actor, or we can say the one who does the action in every manifestation that we see, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is known as Tawhidul Af'al. Another meaning which also the scholars of mysticism mention, and in the Holy Quran also it has been mentioned, is that God's action is one from which multiplicity of actions come about or issue forth moment by moment. So, as the Holy Quran, inshallah, when we look at the Quran, we'll come to realize that Allah says, our command is only one, wahida, kalamhin bil basar, like the blinking of the eye, only once. At once we are creating, and the multiplicity is created at that same time. Not that Allah is doing one job here, He's commanding at one place and then the other place, and it's not like the human being, the limited human being. But obviously there is a discussion about the perfect man, how he comes to a very high level and what he can do by Allah's power. So these are the two things that inshallah we will talk about when we talk of at-tawhidul af'ali. One, that every action is existentiated by Allah, right? And number two, that Allah's action is one only. You see, because His reality is one. Obviously, this has been discussed in philosophical and mystical discussions. Because our discussion is Quranic, we will only look at the verses that actually allude to this reality. So this is what at-tawhid al-af'ali is all about. Now, another very important introductory discussion that we wanted to mention before we begin our session about how we can look at Tawheed from the Holy Quran is that just a very quick glimpse at the ways of establishing Tawheed, because it is important for us to know that, if a person wants to know the reality of Tawheed, how should he go about it? We have enumerated here 4 main methods of establishing Tawheed. One is the religious method, which is the narrative method. Many of us believe in Tawheed because the Quran teaches us, right? We have established that Quran is a mu'jiza and it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, whenever we are told in the Holy Quran about Tawheed, Tawheedul Dhat, Tawheedul Sifat, or Tawheedul Af'al, we obey because we know that this is a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the narrative method. Then we have the philosophical method, whereby intellectually a person proves the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the non-composite oneness of Allah. the oneness of his attributes and his essence, and the oneness of his action, as we mentioned, the three kinds of Tawheed. But all this is done intellectually, and you'll find many of the scholars, the philosophers especially, use this method. The first method, the religious method, is employed by the mutakallimin, the scholastic theologians who use this method. They look at the Quran, they take out the information, and they give it to the people, and the people do believe in it because they believe in the Quran. The only difference is that, you know, in these scholastic theologians, we have different grades of these scholastic theologians, because a person cannot just understand the very subtle realities of Tawheed just from the apparent import of some of the verses. No, you need to have the acumen of knowing the subtleties and knowing how to deduce the realities of Tawheed from the Holy Quran. All right. One of those who really was successful in this regard was Allama Muhammad Tabatabai in Al-Mizan. When you look at the verses of Tawheed, which inshallah we will mention, and you look at how he has discussed them, you come to realize that how beautifully and how profound he has gone and has understood the subtleties of Tawheed from the verses of the Quran. Whereas you'll find others who use the Quran now and again, but they cannot understand the crux of the matter. So this is the religious method that scholastic theologians usually use. The second method is the philosophical method that I just mentioned, that intellectually, philosophically, this is proven. And many scholars, one of the greatest among which is Mullah Sadra, has actually taken this method, the philosophical method, and he has been very successful in this regard. This is the intellectual method, the method of metaphysics. So we have another method, which is the mystical method, and that is the intuitive method. It's through intuition that you come to realize Tawheed, and this is the Tawheed of the mystic scholars. They just don't only look at the intellectual proofs or the religious proofs, but they vision the reality. That, for example, La fa'ila illallah, that there is no doer of action except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah is ahad, and that Allah is the overwhelming one. All these things, they not only conceptualize and understand intellectually, but they see it, they vision it. So this is the third method of understanding Tawheed. And the fourth method, which I think is the best of all the methods, is the aggregate method, merging all the above. And this was one of the very beautiful tactics, or we can say one of the beautiful arts that Mullah Sadra was bestowed with. You will find that he would merge everything. He would bring the Quran, he would use philosophical proof, and he would also narrate his mystical findings of the realities of Tawheed and so on. So these are the methods that are employed. What we will try to limit is our discussion on is the religious method. That's what this course is all about. Inshallah, there will be other methods that will be spoken in other courses, but this course will be what the Quran has to say about Tawheed. Obviously, sometimes when we want to discuss the profundities of Tawheed, inshallah, we will look at some philosophical things here and there, but we will not go very deep in these sessions. What we will come to understand is that the Quran has talked about those very beautiful meanings and subtle meanings of these three kinds of Tawheed that we have already mentioned. Now, a very important thing that I would like to mention is that all the aforementioned methods have led the scholars to the three kinds of Tawheed we mentioned earlier. Hence, they do not contradict each other, but rather supplement one another. However, what is important to know is that comprehending the Quran and Hadith is not the task of any layperson. We have levels of comprehension, and hence one must struggle to learn the correct methods of comprehension and achieve levels of accuracy and depth to draw the depths of the divine teachings of the Quran and Hadith. So there are two important things that I have just mentioned here in this writing that is before you. One is that never think that, that the mystics have a different view and those who are the religious scholastic theologians have a different view. No, all the views actually are the same, but the ways of understanding are different. Obviously, there are lapses that some of the scholastic theologians have mentioned, as inshallah, when we talk about the Tawhid of the essence, we will find that many at times you will find even some philosophers who are, I'm talking about peripatetic philosophers, the Hukama al-Mashsha', those who like Ibn Sina and the like, will find some of the things that they have mentioned about Tawheed does not tally with the Quranic Tawheed, the Tawheed that says that Allah's essence is the overwhelming one. Inshallah, we'll talk about that afterwards, but this is point number one. And point number two is that, as I mentioned earlier, that you may have the Quran, you may have the translation of the Quran, but understanding the subtleties of what the Quran is saying is extremely important. So is not the work of every person. You find that great scholars like Allama Tabatabai and Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli and Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh Amuli have done a very beautiful job, a commendable job when it comes to understanding the profound matters contained in these verses that talk about Tawheed. So these are the two things that I wanted to draw your attention to. Now, let us look at the main thing that we are going to discuss, inshallah, and that is Tawheed in the Holy Quran. What does the Holy Quran say about Tawheed? In order to discuss this, what I have done is I have tried to consider a certain hadith that tells us that if you want to know Tawheed, the profound matters of Tawheed, this is where you can get from the Holy Quran. Now, first, let's mention the riwayah, and then we will consider that those verses that the Imam is talking about, inshallah. This riwayah is very well known, and one of the great scholars who have talked about this is Imam Khomeini in his 40 hadith. In fact, the 40th hadith, you will find that it is about this beautiful hadith, all right, about how to understand the depths of Tawheed. This riwayah is from Asim ibn Hamid. He says that Su'ila Ali ibn al-Hussein, Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam was asked about the meaning of Tawheed, عن التوحيد, فقال, and he said, إن الله عز وجل علم أنه سيكون or يكون في آخر الزمان أقوام متعمقون فأنزل الله تعالى قل هو الله أحد والآيات من سورة الحديد إلى قوله وهو عليم بذات الصدور فمن رام وراء ذلك فقد هلك, which is that Ali ibn al-Hussein Zain al-Abidin was asked about or concerning Tawheed, and he replied, verily, God Almighty and Glorious knew that in the ultimate era, there would be people of profound thinking. And so God, the Exalted, sent down Qul huwa Allahu Ahad. This is chapter 112. And the verses of Surah Al-Hadid, the first verses of Surah Al-Hadid, until his words, and he knows well that which is in the hearts. Hence, someone who seeks to go beyond that will perish. Now, this is a very beautiful hadith that great scholars have talked about. For example, Mullah Sadra talks about it in his commentary and exegesis of Usul al-Kafi. We have Imam Khomeini also, as I said, in his 40 hadith. And a couple of scholars have actually seen this hadith and tried to comment on the subtleties of this hadith. And as it is clear that, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that there will be a people who will try to look at the depths and the crux of the realities. That is why he gave these verses of the Quran, so that they can understand, or from their acumen, they can try to draw the beautiful meanings about Tawhid, which is the reality of what we want to talk about, all right? That Tawhid of essence of Allah, Tawhid of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Tawhid of Allah's actions. So this was one hadith. Obviously, this hadith also has been mentioned by other scholars, and they try to mention something negative about it. But after looking at the lexical sources, the first-hand lexical sources, you find that how Imam Khomeini has translated this hadith and how the likes of Allama and others have translated is what the hadith actually means. Muta'ammiq is a person who comes to the reality of the matter. He cuts the shell and goes towards the core and finds it, all right? So this is as far as this hadith is concerned. So we, inshallah, will look at a very, we can say, a quick glimpse of at Surah Al-Tawheed, that is Surah Qul Huwa Allah, and look at the meanings, and then come to understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about, so that we know what Tawheedul Dhat is, Tawheedul Sifat is, and Tawheedul Af'al. Obviously, we'll not be able to cover everything in this session, but we will continue in our next session when we stop, inshallah. So, inshallah, so we'll look at Surah Qul Huwa Allah in this session. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. According to Shia scholars, every surah begins with Bismillah except Surah At-Tawbah. But Bismillah or the Basmala is a part of the surah, although the numbering is according to what other Muslims believe, like our Sunni brothers, that, you know, it's not necessary that every surah's first verse is Bismillah. That's why you will find that the verse number 1 is from the second verse after the Bismillah, for example. That is where verse number 1 starts. But according to the muhaqqiqeen of the Shia scholars, they believe that Bismillah is a part of every surah except Surah At-Tawbah. And therefore, Qul Huwa Allah also, the first verse is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And I have just given you a breakdown of what Bismillah means. Usually, this abtadi'u, one of the variable meanings is that this abtadi'u, I begin, is hidden, because, you know, it starts like with the name of Allah. So what with the name of Allah? So there's a verb that is hidden. That is how the scholars of grammar have, you know, given the probability. One of the probabilities is abtadi'u, I begin. So this is elliptical and hidden. Abtadi'u bi Ismillah. I begin with Allah's name, who is Rahman, all beneficent, and Rahim. This is something that is simple, although it has its other deep discussions. I don't want to go into the details of that, but very short, the two kinds of Rahmah that Allah is talking about is the all-comprehensive Rahmah, in whose stomach is Ar-Rahim. So Rahman is more comprehensive than Rahim. So everything that Rahim manifests, Rahman also manifests. So, for example, when we are talking about hellfire, like in Surah Ar-Rahman, Allah is talking about hellfire, and then He says, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ? Which of the bounties of your Lord you two, jinn and men, will deny? So here He has taken this Jahannam as a bounty. So Jahannam is not a manifestation of Rahim, but it is a manifestation of Rahman, because every wujud, everything that exists in this universe is a manifestation of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is what is known as Ar-Rahma Ar-Rahmaniyya. Not only in this physical cosmos, but we are talking of the whole universe with all the levels that it contains. Everything is a mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is the manifestation of Ar-Rahman. But Ar-Rahim has an opposite. and that opposite is, for example, al-muntaqim, al-mu'aqib. Allah is, for example, the punisher, the person who, for example, who is wrathful, for example. All these names go against this specific kind of rahmah, al-rahmah al-rahimiyya. But this rahmah al-rahimiyya, all the extensions of al-rahmah al-rahimiyya are the extensions of al-Rahman also. Because al-Rahman, we are talking of any extension, any wujud, any, we can say, existence that we find outside is a meaning. Even shaitan, la'natullah alayh, even shaitan and his wujud, his existence is a manifestation of Allah's mercy. All right. This has its discussion, inshallah. We will discuss about it, that how he can play a role of mercy. But anything that Allah gives and bestows is a manifestation of Allah's rahmah. This was Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So the first verse after that is Qul huwallahu ahad. Say he. Here, he, inshallah, as we look at this, we will explain. First, let's look at the meaning. Say he who is Allah is the non-composite. So Qul is an interrogative and command to the Prophet to say it, all right? So that he can say this. Who in some of the riwayats, as we'll come to see, it is known as Al-Ismul A'zam. It is the greatest name of God. Some of the insightful scholars, however, have said that it is a level of the divine reality which is even beyond the reality of the name Allah. Allah actually is that all-comprehensive name that includes all other names. So when you say Allah, Al-Rahman has come, Al-Rahim has come, Al-Kareem has come, Al-Jamil has come. All the beautiful names of Jamal and Jalal come under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But before this manifestation of the names of Allah, there is a higher manifestation, which is that which is known as Ahad, all right? Where there is no multiplicity, even intellected also. Everything is one. And this is the highest level that a person can understand and comprehend, all right? Beyond that is a higher level that we don't want to talk about. But then here, when we say Huwa, it refers to that level, all right? So that reality is Allah. That essence that we are talking about is Allah, the necessary being who has all the perfect attributes. Now, whenever the word Allah comes, we know we are talking of all the divine names, the all-comprehensive name Allah, which cannot be an attribute of God. You can't say, for example, God, for example, Al-Ilah Allah, for example. You say, but you can attribute it with other attributes. For example, you say Allahu As-Samad, Allahu Ahad, or Allahu Rahmanur Rahim. So you can qualify the name Allah, but you cannot take it as a quality for another name, for example. No, that is not possible. But you can make it in such a way that it is qualified by other names, by other adjectives, all right? So you say Allahu Samad, for example, Allahu Rahmanur Rahim, Allahu Kareemul Jamil, because Allah talks of that essence that has all the perfect attributes, all right? That is what Allah is. So, Qul huwallahu ahad. Say that highest essence, all right, who is Allah, because he is the same essence, has all these attributes, all right? This who Allah is ahad. So say he who is Allah is ahad, all right? This is just, in Arabic, we call it badal. That means that it is a substitute of huwa itself. So when we say Qul huwa Allah, it's as if I'm saying that say he who is Allah, because this he here, it is substituted by Allah. And that is why we say he who is Allah is ahad, is one, all right? But here, ahad is something that we have to understand to prove that this is what is, the reality of Allah's essence, that it is ahad. And ahad means a non-composite reality, right? Now, with regard to that, we say that the necessary being is a non-composite reality. Despite having multiple attributes of perfection, he is simple, basit. His perfections are his very essence and not components of his essence. Hence, he is not composed of an essence and attributes. He is a non-composite one. As Imam Ali alayhi salam says, ahadiyul ma'na. Imam Ali alayhi salam, inshallah, we'll talk about one of the dictums of Imam where he says that when you're talking of Allah as one, know that he's ahadiyul ma'na. It means his reality is ahad. He does not have parts. Just imagine if something has parts, that means he is dependent on those parts. In fact, the reality of that thing also comes that even while you are looking at that with its parts, you know that before it coming to existence, its parts must be there. So that means it is a contingent reality. It was not and it came to be. While Allah is not a contingent reality, he is a necessary being, all right, who was, is, and will always be. Because his reality is the reality of being and existence in the true sense of the word. That means, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's essence is to exist. And you can't strip off somebody's reality from itself, somebody's essence from itself. And therefore, even you can never conceive that, Allah was not there at a time and then he came to be known. That is a contingent reality. But Allah is pre-eternal and post-eternal and sempiternal. He is always there. And in fact, this time, even when we try to think about it, we think about it in terms of time. We say that Allah was there, is there, and will be there. This is because we are still inside time. That actually time is a corollary and it's a kind of fruit of the creation of this material world. So time is a fruit of matter itself. But we are talking of something which is beyond matter, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's essence is existence. It can just not be. It is, will be, and will always forever remain. And as inshallah, we will also try to discuss this, that if you look at the reality of being and existence, you find that its reality is infinite. Because the moment you say that, for example, Allah's existence is up to, for example, these many millions of miles or kilometers, you have actually limited him. And this also, we talk about him in a material sense, but he is metaphysical, he's beyond that. All right, so this is obviously these discussions, if you really want them to be very clear for you, then one of the very important disciplines of knowledge is philosophy, whereby you come to realize what we talk about it in the depths of the matter. So when we say Qul huwa Allahu ahad, that means say, O Prophet, Allah, say, O Prophet, he, huwa, who is the essence, who is Allah, because you are substituting huwa with Allah. Allah is ahad. Although you know that Allah has all the names, but don't be confused that because he has names, he is composed of the essence and the names. No, because that makes him composite. And when there is a reality which is composite, that means it is contingent. It was not, and it came to be. And Allah is not like that. Allah was always, is, and will remain. Not also in terms of time, but even beyond time, because his essence, very essence is being, all right? So this is as far as what ahad actually means. Now, what are the implications of belief in divine compositeness, all right? This is what we have actually discussed, but I'll just give you to read this notification so you know what we were discussing. If God consisted of his essence and attributes, he would be dependent on them for his existence, which reveals contingency and his preceding non-existence. And this is contrary to what has been established, that God is independent in existence. Now, this is something very important. You know, when we talk about God's existence, one of the ways that is the a posteriori way, that means you go from the effect to cause. You start thinking that, for example, there was a time I was not there and I came to be. So who created me? A power created me. We know that 100%. That is completely intelligent to know that something that was not and came to be was created. So you said this power created me, who is God, for example. So somebody may ask you that who created him, for example. Then the same question will continue after he's told that there is a higher power who created him. So you say, so that is not God then. There is a creator who created this, but is not yet God, because he's not the ultimate cause. And you continue the chain of causes and effects, and it comes to the first primal cause, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is how a group of scholars try to get to the reality that Allah is independent in existence, because the primary cause was not caused, was the ultimate cause for all the effects that issued forth, right? That's what we talk about when we talk of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Although the mystical scholars and the what philosophers of the transcendent philosophy talk of a very beautiful reality, and that they say that, you know, if you just study existence, just study the reality of existence, you will come to independent existence. You will come to infinite existence. You will come to an existence that was, is, and will always remain. So a sempiternal existence, all right? Because you have studied the crux of existence. You don't need to look at outside and say that because this person is contingent, he was not, and he came to be, and therefore he must have been created 100%. Intellectually, we come to this conclusion. We have ilmul yaqeen about it. So you say, okay, since we have known that he has a creator, but what about that creator? Who created that creator? And so on, we go on. Sometimes we say that, no, he was not created. He has independent existence. Obviously, there are some discussions, very beautiful discussions in philosophy, but this is not a class of philosophy, and therefore we'll not go into the details of that. I just wanted to draw your attention that some philosophers talk about this causal link, and then they try to prove the primary cause in a very beautiful way. And then we have another kind of philosophers who are the scholars of mysticism as well, in their profound works. They say that you don't have to go so far, you know, just look at existence, study existence, and you know it is wajibul wujud, you know, it is ghayr mutanahin, for example. So this is something that we just talked about, but I just wanted to emphasize. Now, because we are talking about the religious outlook of the divine unity, I just wanted to draw your attention to 3 schools of thought about this the unity of divine essence. One of them are the Ash'arites, who are also known as Ash'aris. A group of Muslims are of the opinion that God consists of his essence and essential attributes, or the attributes of essence. In other words, he is composed of his essence and his attributes. This obviously does not cohere with God's non-composite oneness. Obviously, this is something very clear. Now, this is as far as the Ash'arites are concerned. I just would like to bring a proof of that. Or before coming to the proof, let's look at what the second group say about the oneness of divine essence. The second group, because it came to realize that, God is one reality. And therefore, how can we conceive an essence and attributes? They said, then he doesn't have attributes. Rather, his essence is a naib, is a kind of representative of his attributes, which actually goes against the Qur'an, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enumerates attributes of Allah. Huwa Allahul Wahidul Samad, and so many other names. Huwa Sami'ul Alim, Huwa Rahmanul Rahim, and all these beautiful names that are mentioned in the Quran in different verses that shows that Allah has these attributes, isn't it? But yes, when we talk about Allah's attributes, we don't talk about anthropomorphic attributes. We don't talk about attributes that are of the human being. We talk of attributes which do not have any imperfection whatsoever. And these attributes are one with the essence. So Allah does have attributes. But the Mu'tazilis, unfortunately, they have this view of representation. They say that God does not have attributes at all. His essence represents his attributes. An example of them is one of the Imams of the school of thought of Mu'tazila, known as Abbad ibn Sulaiman. Obviously, let me tell you one thing, that some of the Mu'tazilis believe in this. Otherwise, others are in line with what the Shias believe, that Allah's essence and his attributes are one. There is no composition. It's our intellect that draws these meanings when it understands that Allah's essence is in this way. For example, knowledge, because Allah's essence is infinite, so he has presence everywhere, and therefore he has knowledge. He is all-knowing, right? So we try to draw knowledge by not saying that, there is an essence and then there is a part where Allah's knowledge is there, that is not there. So this is the second opinion, which is the opinion of the Mu'tazilis. So Abbad ibn Sulaiman, I just want to show what he says about the niyaba, that means that Allah doesn't have any attributes. This is a translation of his original, which is in Arabic. He says in Arabic, huwa alimun qadirun hayyun wa la uthbitu lahu ilman wa la qudratan wa la hayatan wa la uthbitu sam'an wa la uthbitu basaran wa aqulu huwa alimun bi'ilmin qadirun بقدرة حي لا بحياة وأقول هو عالم لا بعلم قادر لا بقدرة حي لا بحياة سميع لا بسمع وكذلك سائر ما يسمى من الأسماء التي يسمى بها, which is very simple, as I've given you the meaning. Just give me a moment. It seems that I cannot get back to the previous page. All right. I don't know how to go to the previous page because it's blocking me. But anyway, the crux of the matter of what Abbad says, one of the leaders of Mu'tazila, that I do not establish knowledge for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He knows, but he does not know by knowledge. He has power, but not by power, and so on. All right. So some of the scholars say that Abbad actually meant what the Shias imply when they talk of oneness. All right. That Allah has knowledge, but not a separate knowledge, which is other than the essence. All right. That was the qawl of Abbad. Now, let's look at what the Shias say, and they get from the riwayat of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. One of the well-known riwayat that talks about God's essence is this beautiful riwayah that is that happened in the Battle of Jamal. In the Battle of Jamal, a Bedouin Arab approaches Imam Ali alayhi salam, asking him about God's oneness. And the Imam responds saying that there are two kinds of oneness that cannot be attributed to God, and that is the numerical oneness that allows a second, and the oneness that reveals one kind within a species. Like you say, this is one kind of a human being from the species of the human being. This is one kind of a certain animal, for example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can't say that he is one like that. So thinking that other kinds of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can also be conceivable. Then the Imam tells him about two kinds of oneness that can be attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is the non-composite oneness that we talked about, and the peerless oneness. That means that there is none like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because once we have understood the non-composite oneness, out of which we come to realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot accept a second, then even this state of peerlessness is proven by itself. So, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, as the Qur'an says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is none like Allah, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. So this is what was about this beautiful hadith. You will be surprised. The story is that a person suddenly comes in the Battle of Jamal and asks Imam Ali alayhi salam about Tawhid. And the others try to complain and say, oh Ali, what is wrong with this person? Why is he talking about this while you are in the battle? And Imam Ali alayhi salam says that, you know, what we want from the people is this very Tawheed that we are talking of. So when you look at the practical implications of Tawheed, you'll come to realize that what Imam Ali alayhi salam says is something very profound and very important. This is another hadith, or in fact the continuation of what Imam has said. He says that فَأَمَّا اللَّذَانِ لَا يَجُوزَانَ عَلَيْهِ. The first two kinds of Tawheed that were not allowed, I just would read the translation, that would, I think, suffice. The two kinds of oneness not allowed are when one says one and intends the numerical one. This is for a kind of a comprehensive answer to what we just mentioned in short when we translated the previous page. So here what Imam is trying to say is that he is not a one that can accept a second besides him. Even when you say God is one, when we say God is one, we are muwahid in one way. We believe in Tawheed, but still our belief is still, we can say, deficient. Why is it deficient? Because when we are talking of Allah's oneness, we are talking of the numerical oneness. That means that after Allah, so Allah is mahdud, Allah is limited, and after the reality of Allah, there is another reality. But we say, no, that is not how Allah is. Allah is not the numerical one. And this is something very important to understand. And then he says, also when one says he is one and intends one kind within a species. Then Imam continues and says, as for the two kinds of oneness allowed, A, when one says he is one and intends his uniqueness in the things and his peerlessness, the two things that we just mentioned. When one says he is one and intends that he is non-composite in terms of reality. لا ينقسم في وجود ولا عقل ولا وهم كذلك ربنا. He cannot be divided in existence, nor in your intellect also, nor in your imagination, all right? So he cannot be divided. He is that non-composite one. This is what Imam is saying. This was the first narration that was very interesting. So Imam clearly tells us that that ahadiyya, that oneness that we are talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, two allowed, but two kinds of oneness are not allowed. Those which are not allowed, as he has mentioned, that we are not allowed to say that Allah is the numerical one, and many you will find, I'm not talking about the listeners, but I'm talking of many people. You will find they talk about Allah being one, but in their mind they know that Allah is there and the creation is somewhere else, or the creation is near Allah, but they are in two different places. No, that is impossible. When Allah is there, then another cannot be conceived. And what is the secret of those others and where are they? This is something which, inshallah, we will discuss in our later session. But first of all, up to now, we have to understand that two kinds of oneness can be attributed to Allah and two kinds of oneness cannot be attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is another hadith where Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam was once asked, how then is he Allah the one? How do I say that Allah is one? And the Imam responded, he is one in his essence, which means that he is not one like other ones. This is because the ones other than him are divisible, while he is an indivisible one, and he cannot be enumerated. So Imam talks about the same oneness, and he says that, you know, he's not a numerical one, and nor is he a one that can be divided. Rather, he is a one that cannot accept a second. He cannot be enumerated. That means, okay, we said Allah is one, so then after one comes two. No, two cannot come into being because of his comprehensive reality. Another beautiful hadith about divine oneness is this from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, when he is reported to have said to one of his companions, Muhammad bin Muslim, innahu wahidun samadun ahadiyul ma'na laysa bima'ani kathira mukhtalifa. He is one, the infinite, the non-composite reality, and not many different realities. Here, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam talks about that oneness that cannot accept a second, and that oneness which is ahadiyul ma'na, that means it is non-composite, it is a simple reality, it is basit, laysa bima'ani kathira, not like how the Ash'arites believe that, for example, God has the essence and he has attributes, and the essence plus his attributes make up his reality. Here Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam quite clearly says that he is one, but he is samad. Inshallah, when we talk about Allah samad, we'll come to realize how powerful is this word samad. Ahadiyul ma'na, that means that he is one, but in terms of not having any kind of division whatsoever. So this is another hadith. Then we have another hadith where Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, a questioner asks Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, so you say that he is the hearing and the seeing. Imam said he is hearing and seeing, meaning hearing without a bodily part and seeing without any instrument. Rather, he hears by his self and sees by his self. And when I say that he hears by his self and sees by his self, it does not mean that he is a thing and his self is another thing. This is so beautifully defined by Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam. Because when the questioner asks, he has some stereotypes in his mind that, when we talk about Allah is hearing and seeing, that means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like a composition. And Imam says he is hearing and seeing without a bodily part. Don't think that it is like having ears, for example, to hear or eyes to see. No, Allah is not like that. And even when we say that he is seeing by his self, doesn't mean that he is something and his self is another thing. No, his reality sees and his reality hears, and there is no composition whatsoever. His reality is such that it has a comprehension of every reality in terms of seeing, in terms of hearing, and in terms of all the beautiful perfections that we talk about with regard to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not that he is composite and composed of these things, right? So this is another noteworthy hadith from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. Now, there is another hadith also that I would like to mention, because this hadith gives us an outline of the levels of knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even there is a kind of miscomprehension or misconstruing the reality of what Imam is talking about. And that's why you will find some of the scholars or even some of the Muslims have deviated just because of this hadith, not knowing the reality of the hadith. I'm going to give you a synopsis of the meaning of the hadith, and then we will go forward with our discussion. The hadith says, أَوَّلُ الدِّينِ مَعْرِفَتُهُ. The beginning of religion is to know him. وَكَمَالُ مَعْرِفَتِهِ التَّصْدِيقُ بِهِ. And the perfection of one's knowledge of him is to believe in him. وَكَمَالُ التَّصْدِيقِ بِهِ تَوْحِيدُهُ. And the perfection of belief in him is to reckon him to be one. وَكَمَالُ تَوْحِيدِهِ الْإِخْلَاصُ لَهُ. And the perfection of reckoning him to be one is to devote oneself entirely to him. وَكَمَالُ الْإِخْلَاصِ لَهُ نَفْيُ الصِّفَاتِ عَنْهُ. And the perfection of devotion is divesting him from attributes. This is where people start saying that, the reality is with the Mu'tazilites, because the Mu'tazilites say that God doesn't have any attribute and that his essence is representing all the attributes. But then this goes against the Qur'an. So here you'll find a number of scholars like Mullah Sadra and others have explained and said this nafyu sifat is nafyu sifat az-za'ida ala dhat. That means those qualities that are superadded to the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not that Allah has essence and he has these attributes so that you qualify Allah with these attributes and say Allah is knowledgeable. That means Allah is there and then there is something that is knowledgeable or knowledge which is there with Allah to make him composed. No, there is no composition whatsoever. So this is what divesting him from attributes actually means. Not that saying that he doesn't have any attributes. Otherwise, he clearly says, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى. And to Allah alone and exclusively belong all the beautiful names. And the reality of name is an essence with an attribute. So Allah has all these beautiful attributes. So we cannot negate Allah from the attributes. So this negation that Imam Ali alayhi salam is talking of is the attributes which are superadded to the essence. That means Allah has an essence and other attributes. No, that is shirk. Allah is not composed of the essence and the attributes. So Imam himself, Imam Ali alayhi salam, after having mentioned those 5 levels, continues and tells us the meaning of what he means when he says that, Allah doesn't have any attributes, kamalul ikhlas, to devote to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reckon him to be one is nafyu sifat anhu. That means negating attributes from him. What is that? Imam continues. He says, لِشَهَادَةِ كُلِّ صِفَةٍ أَنَّهَا غَيْرُ الْمَوْصُوفِ وَشَهَادَةِ كُلِّ مَوْصُوفٍ أَنَّهُ غَيْرُ الصِّفَةِ فَمَنْ وَصَفَ اللَّهَ سُبْحَانَهُ فَقَدْ قَرَنَهُ وَمَنْ قَرَنَهُ فَقَدْ ثَنَّاهُ. Says, why should we divest Allah from all the attributes? Why? Due to the testimony of every attribute that it is other than the object of attribution. So we have an object of attribution, which is the essence of Allah, and then we have an attribute, which is knowledge and so on. He says that cannot be there. That is impossible. So actually, he's talking of the added attributes to the essence. There is nothing like that. We know that it is the essence, and from the essence, we understand the different attributes, not that Allah is composed. So here, Imam says, due to the testimony of every attribute that it is other than the object of attribution, and the testimony of every object of attribution that it is other than the attribute. So whoever describes Allah, the glorified, with an attribute has associated him with something. This is shirk now. You are saying that Allah is with an attribute. That attribute is separate and Allah is separate. Or even if they are joined, but it is two, that is shirk. So that's why Imam says, so whosoever, he says, so whosoever describes Allah, the glorified, with an attribute has associated him with something. And whosoever associates him with something has reckoned him to be dual, not singular, not one. And then Imam continues, وَمَنْ ثَنَّاهُ فَقَدْ جَزَّأَهُ. And he who has reckoned him to be dual has divided him. Why? He has divided him to his essence, or into his essence and his attributes. So, or for example, you consider him to have a particular attribute and qualify him with a particular attribute. That's why you consider him dual, right? So, and he who has reckoned him to be dual has divided him. And he who has divided him is ignorant of him, because Allah is not dual. He is not composite. He is non-composite. He is one reality. He has all the attributes, but a person can comprehend it intellectually, what his attributes are, not that from knowing that, for example, his reality is in parts, as we have been mentioning now and again. And then he continues, Imam, and says, and he who is ignorant of him has pointed to him, and he who has pointed to him has limited him, and he who limits him has counted him. Why does Imam say pointed him? Because now there are two realities, one reality with two sides. So you point that this side and that side. So when you are pointing to this reality, saying that this is God and this is his attributes, you are ignorant of him. And he who has pointed to him has limited him, obviously, because when you point at him and say that this is where Allah is and this is his attribute, that means you are limiting him. That means that attribute is not Allah's essence, and that essence is not Allah's attribute. All right? And he who limits him has counted him. Obviously, one who limits Allah has counted him. We came to realize that the numerical one is something that you count. You say that Allah is one, and then you are thinking of other things also apart from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you have limited Allah. But if Allah was limitless, and he is limitless, then a second cannot be conceivable, parallel to Allah. Yes, when we talk of the other entities, as inshallah we'll talk about, these are all his manifestations, and they are not separate from him. Many a times we just think that, there is a kind of separation, that Allah is there up looking at us, and he's powerful. He knows everything what is going on down, but he is there, and then we are here. And because the way, I am separate from another person, Physically, that is how Allah is now separate from us, but He is, for example, more higher and more far and so on. The way we say that, Ya Ab'ad al-Ab'adin, one of the names. And then we say, Ya Aqrab al-Aqrabin. We take it metaphorically and say that, Allah is control of everything and therefore there is no problem. But He is there and we are here. No, that is not the case. We have a certain kind of relationship that inshallah we'll talk about when we talk of Tawhid al-Af'al, and when we mention the verses concerning Tawhid al-Af'al, inshallah. The second verse of Surah Al-Tawheed is Allahu Samad. Allah is the infinite one. So Allah, who is the necessary being, who has all the perfect names, as we said, is As-Samad. As-Samad is a very, we can say, comprehensive word. And that's why you will find that the scholars have tried to not only look at the linguistic connotation, but have looked at the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam about Samad itself. That what is the reality of Allah being Samad? What is this Samad? One of the meanings is that He is besought for needs. So everyone who, the Qur'an says clearly, Antumul fuqara ila Allah, wallahu huwa al-ghaniyyul hamid. You all are poor with regard to Allah. Your existence and your subsistence every moment is dependent on Allah's command. If Allah doesn't say kun to you, fayakun will not transpire. And that pertains to every element of the entire macrocosm, the entire cosmic reality. You find that Allah, moment by moment, is giving grace. So we all are in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So He is besought for needs. So that is one of the meanings. Another is that Samad actually means that He is full. That means He doesn't have any kind of paucity in Him. He doesn't have any kind of imperfection whatsoever. So when you look at a reality like that, you'll come to realize that such a reality is infinite, is what is known as simple and basitul haqiqah. So this is what Samad is all about. Now, in order to understand this reality of Samad from the great scholars themselves, I've just tried to quote a few that inshallah we will benefit from. But before that, one of the things that we have to understand is the attributes of perfection exclusively belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that there is no kind of deficiency in having any attribute whatsoever. Just give me a moment. There is a kind of interruption. So as we were saying that if you look at the verse that we just quoted earlier, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوهُ بِهَا. This وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى shows that all the attributes belong exclusive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, exclusively to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here in this Allahu Samad, if you look at a sentence whereby you have a subject and a predicate, and the predicate has alif and lam, the definite article al, this shows exclusivity and restriction. That means that when we say Allahu Samad, that means there is no other Samad except Allah, all right? As we are trying to understand what Allahu Samad is, one of the points which is worthy of consideration is that Allah is, who is the possessor of all the attributes, is besought of all for their needs, meaning that they all depend on Him in whatever they have. However, He alone is the source of all the perfections. Because when we say Allahu Samad, this alif and lam in the predicate, after the subject, after the mubtada, the khabar in grammatical terms, where alif and lam comes, shows this samad is only for Allah, none else. So in simple terms, to him exclusively belong all the attributes of perfection. The definite article al also alludes to the exclusivity of divine attributes. Now, let's look at what samad means in some of the narrations. Inshallah, we'll try to finish some of these narrations, because I think we might not finish this session the way we had decided. There are a couple of slides remaining, but one of the places where we get the meaning of samad, if you remember, the first, when we talked about samad, we looked at the linguistic and lexical implications. Now we look at what the riwayat clearly tell us. So one of the riwayat, which is a very interesting one, is from Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam, an Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. Let me just read the English version, because we don't have enough time. Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam is reported to have said that indeed the Jews asked the Apostle of Allah, "Introduce to us your Lord." And the Holy Prophet, without responding to them, waited for 3 days. Thereafter, this chapter, Qul Huwallahu Ahad, was revealed. The narrator said, so I asked the Imam, what is a samad? And he responded, one who is not hollow, that is, he has no deficiencies and imperfections whatsoever. Just imagine, let's say you have a very beautiful thing and it has some perforations, some deficiencies in it. That is what we call hollowness. Not that, we literally look at a box which is hollow and say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not hollow. That means that he's solid in that physical sense. No, he's not solid in the physical sense. What we mean that he doesn't have any imperfection whatsoever. So this is one of the hadith in this regard. Another hadith is again from Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam. Indeed, the Jews asked the Apostle of Allah, introduce to us your Lord. All right, this is again the same hadith, it seems. I've just repeated it. We've already talked about it. Now, in order to understand this same qawl, that, when we say that Allahu Samad, that means that he doesn't have any kind of deficiency, that he is hollow, he doesn't have any kind of, he's not hollow, he doesn't have any kind of perforation, he is full and brim. For example, we looked at what some of the scholars say in this regard. One of them was Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli. In one of his works, he says that, and God is a Samad, meaning full and brim and possessive of all perfections and free from every kind of imperfection. The same thing that we had mentioned, all right? But sometimes you find that the hadith gives us a meaning, but we need exposition. So one of the expositions which was given is by this great scholar, Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli. He says that when you talk about something which is full and brim, never think about something which is physical or solid. Rather, it is a reality that possesses all the perfections with no deficiency whatsoever. Another elucidation is again by this great scholar in another place, where he says that an infinite being is also Samad, meaning that he leaves no void in terms of width, length, and depth, nor in any of the planes of existence, so that another existence or existence brings its presence. It means that, Allah's Samadiyya and Allah being Samad is that kind of oneness that has filled everywhere such that no other can be conceivable. Right? He mentions this in his work Rahiq Makhtoom, volume 2, verse number or page number 456. So the conclusion that we make is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is simple, that means he is non-composite, and he is overwhelmingly one, right? This is what we talk about when we say Qul huwa Allahu ahad and Allahu samad. Having known that Allah is the infinite one, another can never be conceived parallel to him. It is impossible for another to exist. Hence, since he is samad, he is the overwhelming one, al-wahid, al-qahhar. As some other verses, inshallah, when we look at them, we'll come to realize that the Quran talks of Allah and says, لِمَنِ الْمُلْكُ الْيَوْمِ لِلَّهِ الْوَاحِدِ الْقَهَّارِ. On the day of judgment, Allah will ask, whose is the kingdom today? And then Allah will respond and says, al-wahid al-qahhar. That means one which is overwhelming, the dominating one that cannot accept another whatsoever. Right? So this is as far as the conclusion is concerned. Now, when we talked about Al-Wahid Al-Qahhar, there are a number of verses that inshallah we'll mention one or two before we come to the question and answer session. This is one of the verses where Nabi Yusuf tells the two prisoners who are supposed to be released. To both of them, he says, Ya sahibai sijn arbabun mutafarriqun khayrun amillahul wahidul qahhar. O my prison mates, are different masters better, or Allah, the one, the all-dominant? Here actually, in one way, Nabi Yusuf also gives us a dalil, or gives them a dalil, because they were mushriks, they were not monotheists, so he wanted to make them monotheists. And he actually gives them the proof that, you know, if there is that dominating one, then can we have other arbab, can we have other lords? That is impossible. So this is one place where al-wahid al-qahhar, the same thing as samad. Samad is this al-wahid al-qahhar. Ahad is the same samad because he is non-composite, he is the overwhelming one. And because he is overwhelming one, a second cannot be conceived. And because he is overwhelming one, he is al-wahid al-qahhar. Right? This is one of the verses. Another verse is that same that we talked about, that on the day of judgment, the day when they will emerge from their graves, يَوْمَهُمْ بَارِزُونَ لَا يَخْفَى عَلَى اللَّهِ مِنْهُمْ شَيْءٍ. Nothing about them will be hidden from Allah. Then Allah says, لِمَنِ الْمُلْكُ الْيَوْمِ. Whom does the sovereignty belong today? لِلَّهِ الْوَاحِدِ الْقَهَّارِ. To Allah, the one, the all-dominant. So when Allah talks about one which is all-dominant, don't think that, you know, it talks about a person who just dominates the whole reality other than him. No, no. He is that one which dominates the, we can say, the arena or the stratum of reality. That means another reality cannot be conceived other than him. That wahdatul qahhariyya, that even Allama Tabatabai in a number of places in Al-Mizan mentions. So the all-subduing one is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. We only have 1 minute, so let's open the question session. Answer now. If there is any question with regard to what we have covered, we will inshallah continue with some of the slides that are remaining in our next session, and we will look at other important matters which we have not discussed, especially the Tawhid of Sifat, that is the Tawhid of the attributes of Allah, and the Tawhid al-Af'al, the Tawhid of the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That means only Allah is the person who is the doer of the action. We will, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enables us to do whatever we will because of His wisdom. We will talk about that also inshallah in detail. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin al-ma'sumin. Now, if we have any questions with regard to the slides that we have already covered, you may ask inshallah.
Thank you very much, Jazakumullah. Great session, great lecture by Haji Khalfan. Thank you very much. I really benefited from the lecture, mashallah, and I hope that everyone has benefited. So forum is open. You can unmute yourself and ask question from Haji Khalfan. You can write in the text in the chat box. So we have half an hour for question answer session. So we are at your service, please.
Yes, Hamza, you can ask.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. First of all, Ahsan, Jazakumullah khair. Thank you very much for a beautiful session, Sheikh. I'm sure everyone took a lot from it, so Jazakallah. I'm going to ask a question, and if you want to wait until the next session to answer this, I can understand, but I'm going to try to ask it anyway. So I've been having, I'm someone who does affirm everything you've talked about. So, you know, I do affirm divine simplicity. I do affirm the worldview of the Islamic philosophers. I was having a discussion with one of my friends who is a scholar, but he's more on the orthodox side of things, if I could use that term in inverted commas. And he was struggling to understand like the eternity of creation. And I was trying to explain to him that, you know, Allah is, as you said, His existence is identical to His attributes and His essence, and His attributes are all the same. And therefore, necessarily, He has to create, and His creation is a manifestation, it's the Jalli, right? So, and he was struggling to understand why, he said, okay, well, that results in effectively something other than Allah being eternal with him. Obviously, he has a very different worldview, and he would use, you know, narrations, for example, from the Holy Prophet. We have a narration where the Holy Prophet says along the lines of, you know, God was, and nothing else was with him. Obviously, we understand that that's referring to Allah as well as ontological superiority. And I was just asking for some advice, really. How would you help me trying to engage with him? Because he is very open, but he's really struggling with some presuppositions and preconceived notions about Allah's attributes and how it can be problematic. But obviously, we know that it's not problematic. But if you can give any advice, that'd be fantastic.
First of all, let me tell you that although this session was a Quranic session, but I actually put some mystical points and philosophical points so that, you know, those who have the ability to understand will take this information. Otherwise, it would be just like referring to the Quran and going further, you know, in our slides. But what you are saying, first of all, there is an answer. The continuation of this discussion, lam yalid wa lam yulad, covers what the person has asked you. This is point number one. Point number two, you must understand that even today, we have among scholars who of great respect, who don't believe in these subtle realities that we are talking of, right? Because not that they are negating Tawhid. No, they say that Allah is one, and that there is one ilah only. And they also say that He is indivisible. But when they try to explain it, they can't explain it. And they try to negate what the Urafa or the mystic scholars say. The same hadith that you quoted, perhaps it is not a hadith, but it is a reality that Allah was and nothing was with Him in terms of being separate of Him. Wal'an kama kan, the way now also it is the same. It means there is no separate, because, you know, when you say lam yalid, sometimes a person may think anthropomorphically and say lam yalid means that Allah is not, doesn't have a body like a woman, so that something comes out of the body and a child is begotten. He begets not, nor was He begotten. That's how people understand. But the reality, as you'll find, inshallah, when we look at some of the narrations, that when the Imam is saying, Lam yalid, that means nothing chipped off from him, nothing came out of him. Even when causation transpires, it's not that the cause loses a part of him. Like, the way we look at things materially, that if, for example, I have money and I would like to give sadaqah to a poor person, and when I give sadaqah, I have 100 pounds, for example. When I give, let's say, 10 pounds, 90 pounds remain. This is that kind of physical and material thinking that unfortunately many people have. But there is also another point that I would like to mention. Those who believe that God is one, for example, that God is the indivisible one, He's Ahad, and that God is all powerful, and all that what the Quran says, but not in this way that the Urafa say. They also are believers. We should not negate them and say that they are not believers. No. Everybody has his own capacity. Great scholars like, for example, Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh Amuli, that's what I heard once, is that when he looked at the scholastic theologians, he tried to say that it is as if you are looking at a reality from far. When you come near, you're like the philosopher. And when you are now in contact with that reality, it's like you are a mystic, visioning the reality, all right? So, but you should not try to reprimand that one who hasn't come to the reality. Say that because he believes, he's a muwahid, he believes in one God, he believes that Allah is non-composite. But when you tell him, or when you ask him that non-compositeness means that another thing parallel to him cannot be allowed, and the only sense we can make out of creation is tajalliyat, self-disclosures of Allah that are not separate from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And inshallah, in future, the next session will give a couple of examples to make us understand this, because this is one of the most abstruse and enigmatic realities that not all can understand. This is how can you reconcile oneness with multiplicity. Inshallah, we'll look at that. But as for talking to him, can perhaps mention this, that lam yalid wa lam yulad gives the implication nothing came out from Allah, and therefore there is nothing parallel or other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if he doesn't accept, it is a matter of time to make him understand and digest, but never rebuke such people. They believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's oneness, the way the riwayah says. You see, they will believe in what Imam Ali alayhi salam in Nahjul Balagha says on those two kinds of oneness which are accepted and the two kinds of oneness which are negated. But the problem is when they come to the exposition of the reality. I hope my response was satisfying.
Barakallah fiqh, Jazakallah Hadiya. Yeah, I think, thank you very much. That makes a lot of sense. Jazakallah.
Somebody, I think Brother Imran Mehdi has written his question in the chat box. Can you read?
I cannot read because there is no message over there in the chat box. Okay, let me see. Is it Brother Imran, you said?
Yes, Brother Imran Mehdi. Can you click chat box and then you will be able to see the messages?
Let me see, inshallah.
You can stop sharing screen now, so then you might.
All right, inshallah, no problem.
So he's saying that was there ever a time that Allah was not creating, in that, yes, his attributes are part of his essence, but is it?
Yeah, I've just seen.
Okay.
I've just seen. Yeah.
Okay.
Was there ever a time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was not creating? In that, yes, his attributes are a part of his essence, but is it part of Allah's essence to manifest moment to moment, that is create? Many theologians suggest that there was a time that Allah was not creating. Yeah, obviously this is the view of the scholastic theologians, but Allah, there was never that he never created. So he was a pre-eternal creator, right? So there is, because it is inconceivable for a jawad, a person who is all bestowing and all open-handed, to wait. For what does he wait? When his essence is a pre-eternal essence of giving, a reality that gives mercy, that he has overflowing mercy. His essence is like that. So it's not like there was no time. In fact, at that time, there was no even time when the creation was also there, And some of the implications we get in riwayat is just to make us understand. Otherwise, there is not like, for how long should he wait? And this is something which is absurd if you go and see, because when you are given to give or given to do something, you will always do it. And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pre-eternally existing, therefore he always was Jawad. All right, this is the response. And then we have another question from Zahir Sheikh, and he says, what's the significance of the word huwa, he, in the verse Qul huwa? The verse could have read, say Allah is one. Yeah, you see, this is again a mystical discussion. So I can respond to you in brief, but it is a mystical discussion because the word huwa refers to the first entification of the essence of God. The essence in the highest level, no one can comprehend it except himself. When you do ishara, according to the insightful scholars, huwa talks of the highest level of ishara and that pointing out to Allah's essence in a higher level, which is the first manifestation, huwa. And then you're saying that huwa is the same as this Allah who is now manifesting as the second entification. All right? That is the significance. Now, I don't know if the others have understood, but when we talk of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's reality, we talk of the essence, and then we talk of the self-disclosures of manifestations. The first self-disclosure is huwa, and then the second is Allah. And when we say ahad, we are saying that, this unity is ahadiyul ma'na. Although he is Allah, having all the beautiful attributes, but he is a non-composite one. Not that you can divide him as a composite reality. All right, so this is with regard to the response to Zahir Sheikh. And then Ali Mirza says, are there any books probably in English that cover Tawhid in the Qur'an that you'd recommend? I would recommend all of you, if you are good in Arabic, to read Al-Mizan, especially those verses where Allama Tabatabai talks about, explains the meaning of Tawheed, especially, for example, the chapter Qul Huwa Allah, the commentary of Qul Huwa Allah, and even these verses that I've already given you, like Limanil Mulkul Yawm Lillahi al-Wahid al-Qahar. Why do I say that you should look at such a text? Because he went to the depths and the most profound level of Tawheed. So this is one book that I would suggest. There are other books, but as far as books in English is concerned, there is a book by the late Shaheed Behishti, which is known as, if I'm not mistaken, God in Islam, or it's just God. I have seen this book. It was translated, and he also looks at some of the profound mystical realities, all right? Although his language, the language that he uses is very simple. And inshallah, in my next session, I don't remember offhand, but in my next session, I will give you a list that will, inshallah, help you looking at Tawheed from a Quranic perspective, but in a profound and subtle manner, the way we had discussed, inshallah. There is another person who says, one of the listeners, esteemed listeners, who says, is it possible to get a copy of this portion of the lecture? I am not sure because I'm not the main host, but then we will ask the organizers if they can avail you a copy, then inshallah that will be possible.
Inshallah, later on we can do that. Hajiaga, there are 3 more messages. If you scroll down, more messages.
Yes, no problem. Adil says, question 1, I thought lam yalid is different from lam yulad. Lam yada. Okay. As you explained, nothing came out of him. Instead of he did not procreate, hashahu. How do we better translate lam yalid to differentiate between giving birth, wilada, and procreating, as with taking part in this of the creation of a similar mathil? Anyway, the way this esteemed listener has explained, first of all, I wish to thank you for a question like that. Secondly, I would like to tell you that, you see, when you talk about wilada, it is but obvious, even if you don't use the word lam yada, lam yalid clearly shows that, you know, nothing came out of him. Walam yulad, nor was he begotten. This is the apparent meaning of the words, right? But then when we look at it with regard to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way you rightly said, hashahu, you can't talk of such things that, you know, that he left, or he, for example, procreated, or he was born from somebody. When we talk of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way when you talk that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is angry, you can't say that, you know, he has a certain countenance, and, you know, like the way a person who is physically expressing his anger, obviously that is beyond him. So what, as I said, inshallah, when we talk of lam yalid wa lam yulad, because next session we will talk about that, we'll look at some of the riwayat that actually give us the meaning that lam yalid lam yanfasil minhu shay wa lam yulad wa huwa lam yanfasil min shay. That means nothing came out of him, nor did he come out of anything. So this is the implication as the riwayat gave us, all right? This is as far as Brother Adil is concerned. All right. This esteemed reader says, Subhanallah, thank you so much. I got the answer today after a long time thinking about it. May Allah bless you all for your efforts. May Allah bless you too, inshallah. Thank you for the remark. Also to Hamza Shah, also I would like to thank him for the remark. And then we have another listener. Thank you very much for a fantastic lecture. May Allah bless you too, inshallah. Thank you for your remark. And then we have another comment by Shahid Bahish. His book is known as God in the Qur'an. Thank you very much, Muhammad Jawad Az-Zaki. He has given us the name. Yes, I quite remember to see a book of this name. So Shahid Bahishti's book is God in the Quran. So whosoever would like to refer to that. But as I said, that if you can try to get some of the translations available of Al-Mizan that talk of Tawhid, you will find a lot of treasures that Allama Tabatabai has given. God in the Quran is a brilliant book. Ahsantum.
I think there's.
All right, so I think we stop over here.
Yeah, I think there's no more question. Thank you very much, Haji Awa, for a brilliant and excellent lecture, inshallah. Looking forward for the next session, inshallah, on the 4th of November, next Friday, inshallah.
Inshallah, inshallah. Ahsantum.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.